maybe community areas, or you've got some subdivisions where shared green space could afford 20 wells, and each house needs 3 or 4, that you could have systems share those green spaces, plan that into your tree, plan that into your community spaces, and bring each residence's cost down. Because when I heard you earlier say, what are you trying to achieve, energy saving or cost saving, they're two totally different things. You can't
Right.
control the cost. You can control your energy.
And, you know, what are we trying to achieve? I think that's a good point. So it isn't, our pitch isn't always about being greener, right? I mean, that's important to us, but it's also about how do we make the community more resilient and more robust, you know? And so one of the benefits of just, I mean, going to the eLab Accelerator, one of the things it did was now we've got national press, right? And people are hearing about us. I don't think that we've done anything extraordinary, not that much more than, I mean, there are many communities that have done more, but we've got an advantage right now where there's a little bit of a spotlight on us, so we're trying to use that to say, okay, how can we tap into these technical resources, financial resources, and so, and continuing to have the dialogue, doing these kinds of things, right? You know, it's part of my job to go out and speak to, about once a month I go speak somewhere, and we learn a lot, we gain a lot of knowledge, we gain supporters, and you know, that all has an impact on the community that it's hard to quantify, but I can tell you some of the things that have changed. The attitude is changing in Bloomfield. We were one of the first, during the farm crisis, our bank was one of the first to close, and people were talking about it 20 years later.
We're just now recovering.
Right, you know, they said not only did it drain money out of the community, but all the people that were the risk takers and the innovators, gone. And so you had the people that weren't trying to change, that were steady, which has added some stability, but it's hard to be innovative if you're risk averse, right? And we're just now getting to the point where we're willing to take some risks, we're willing to be entrepreneurial, we're willing to do some of these things. We went from our industrial park for over a decade was half full. Now, in the last 2 years, it's filled up to the point we don't have any space left. We're trying to find a new location. 5 years ago, probably when the housing crisis hit, our True Value closed. Now we've got a new one opening up. We've seen a few new businesses come in along the square, and I think at least part of that is happening because people are hearing a conversation in our community that talks about growth and innovation where they hadn't for 25 years before that. You know, I can't say definitively this caused this, but it's got to be playing a role.
Any questions? I've got plenty of them, but jump on in. Any questions from others? Yeah.
In Saudi Arabia, Aramco, they had centralized heating and cooling facilities for, like, say, 20 houses, where you'd have a central plant that either heated the water in the wintertime or cooled the water in the summertime to circulate to all the housing for heating and cooling. It seems to me that kind of a system would allow a lot more flexibility for what you're using to heat the water, especially. I mean, you could start out with gas. If the gas went way up, you could heat it with solar. But it would, just doing things on a community basis rather than individual housing basis seems to me to have a lot of benefit economically.
So I agree. There are two things that are immediate challenges to that. One is it requires retrofitting our current housing stock. We're not building a lot of new housing. That's one piece. The second piece, if you go back and you think about why we're pursuing energy independence versus net zero. Remember I told you about do-it-yourself and pioneering spirit, independence. Take those three words, pioneering, do-it-yourself, and independence, and say community. And it's really tough to bring those together, right? people are very interested in what they can do for themselves. It's harder to get them talking about what do we do as a community.
Yeah.
How do your schools tie into?
So we have one school that was built in the mid-70s, and we just had a high school completed 5 years ago. And so Doug is also on the school board, so I gotta be careful what I say here. So the school right now, the things that they're looking at are, so we have one of the largest mileage, busing mileages in the state. And so they're looking at converting from the diesel fleet to CNG or propane or something. So that's one way they've already started the conversation as we've talked about energy independence. They're looking at, as I mentioned, we'll be replacing all of their fluorescents with LEDs this spring and summer. They, I think, are open to ideas of solar potentially. So it's one thing we're exploring. It's interesting for a school, you know, if they can put in solar, then they take that, they shift where that money comes from. It's a big deal. They can take their energy costs out of their operating expenses and put it in capital expenses, and it frees up money for books and teachers and so on and so forth. What else is the school looking at? Oh, we just, one of the things we did was brought in a group of about 8 agencies to help us look at food producers and what they could do to be more efficient, whether it's, you know, turning their ovens down for a little bit during the day or handling food recycling. So we just went and looked at
How much waste was this week?
yeah, we figured the school system is throwing away 2 tons of food a week. What can you do with that? You know, so we went through, we brought in some people from the Iowa Waste Reduction Center, and we went and stood and watched kids dump food. And so one of the requirements, this is interesting, they have to, the school has to make sure that any kid going through the line gets a half cup of fruit, right? If they don't take it, they have to make them take the fruit. So they've got a group of apples at the cash register, and so kids come through in the line, they grab an apple, put it on their tray, they walk through the line, pinch the apple. And we watched them throw away 30 apples that hadn't been touched. Well, the school, one of the things that they thought was, we can't do anything about that. You know, they have to take the apple. Once it's on the tray, we can't do anything with the apple. Well, we've learned that, yeah, you can. You can put a bucket there, and as long as the apple hasn't been bitten, you can wash it off and give it away to sports teams or make it freely available to anybody else that wants it. So, you know, it's not a big deal, but 30 apples a day could go from being in the trash to something else. So, you know, we're looking at maybe composting and some other things, or do we do one thing leads to another that leads to another. So we talked about energy, and now we're talking about food. I'm not sure how we're going to do it all, but.
You know, you mentioned the fleet conversion possibly to alternative energy. And CNG, propane are certainly out there. They're not cheap either.
No.
And nor is electric, but in your discussions with even the municipal utility staff, worried about reductions in total usage from efficiency. Utility business models in general, right, are often up in arms. Well, gosh, if we're going to see dramatic reductions from people going their own generation and from efficiency, what do the utilities do? But electrified transportation is a massive opportunity or possibility in the next generation. And is the city, are you all talking a whole lot about electrical transportation options, whether from fleets, individuals, to city?
Some. So right now, the generation of electric vehicles that are out there right now make it a little challenging for us. You know, you're gonna, you know, if you have a 200, 250 mile range, you might get to Des Moines and back. So it's a tough discussion. You know, we have a lot of big pickups, and they're a status symbol in our community. And so then saying, well, let's replace that with an electric vehicle that you can't hear roar. It's a tough thing. It sounds silly, but it's a tough thing. But, you know, to their credit, one of the things the REC did was they purchased a dual fuel vehicle, so it's a gas electric. And not a hybrid, but it switches from one to the other. You know, so they're trying to start the conversation. We've introduced some ideas. One of the things we may put into the streetscape project is some charging stations, just to begin the discussion. If we switch, if the school switched from diesel to even natural gas, it's another point of service for the city just picked up a customer as opposed to losing the customer. So we have some incentive to see that happen, right?
And part of the reason I ask is because, you know, we all talk about solar for locally owned renewables. Wind is not feasible for a business or a home because you can't really get up where the energy is. But for a municipal utility, even a small one, it is. And wind and solar complement each other so well, and as you probably know, wind on the wholesale markets is often a negative value because there's so much of it now.
Right.
And if a local muni built solar and wind, and then you started building the local fleet demand, like a school fleet that could charge at night for 2 cents,
Right.
and still be a profit margin for the, you know, who knows?
Absolutely.
Again, over 10 years, this is a.
Oh, absolutely.
You want to talk about REC and their big deal. You want to talk about?
Yes.
Because wasn't GM interested, or was it Tesla that was interested in that?
Yeah, so Doug's referring to our rural electric cooperative has, they have smart meters through at each household, right? And so they've recently begun a process to change their billing structure from just usage to demand-based and usage. So do you all know what I'm talking about when I say that? Okay, so demand says how much energy are you using at any one point? You know, what's the draw that you're pulling at that point? Versus usage is how many kilowatt hours have you used over the month. And so typically power is most expensive at certain times of the day, and they know that their power is most expensive from 7 to 8 a.m. and from 4 to 8 p.m. So they're trying to shift people away from those times of using power. So basically what they've done is with their metering technology and their new billing structure, they've said, if you'll use power outside of those times, you could potentially save half of the cost of that power, because we won't charge you for the load at that time, the demand. We'll just charge for how much you're using. So it's a pretty innovative way to begin to look at power billing. So.
John, Dan, do you want to add anything or questions for the REC arena?
Now, we're familiar with what Southern's doing as far as the demand, the energy rate. You know, we're exploring those opportunities also. Community solar, I don't know where they're at with the community solar. We had a conference call with them about the metering just recently. We're also looking at a community solar project right now, putting some numbers together, and we're kind of looking that direction also.
What's your how do you do net metering? Do you avoid costs? How does that work at your level?
We do net metering up to, we allow up to 20 kW, or 40 kW, I'm sorry. And we true it up once a year, and they have the option of doing it either in, having the year run from January to December or from April to March. So they have two options. But that's our limit, is 40, and it's in tune with what our G&T allows us to do.
That's pretty progressive for a lot of co-ops aren't there, so I mean that's great. And so that probably covers most of your well, it certainly would cover all of your residential, right? And,
Yes.
And
yeah, it covered, you know, the majority of them that we see put in are going to be at that 40 kW max, just because, you know, just the matter of economics. They don't want to really go over their production because it's just avoided cost if it's over the 40 kW. Or, you know, if they don't use them, they get paid back at avoided cost.
Those are mostly farms.
Sure.
Farms are 40 kW.
right. And dairy is mostly dairy here, or what?
Dairy hogs.
There's a lot of hog, probably more hog facilities than there are dairies in our service territory.
Have you had any discussions around here about biogas?
Oh, the methane digesters?
Yeah.
Our GMT has, I think there's maybe 3 of them now that are operational. They've been using them for a while now. They've had problems with corrosion. It has caused the most difficulties. The bad experiences have had to do with that. The way they set up the rates for those is they don't buy energy from them, they buy actually the gas. That's the way they're set up, but, so there's been kind of mixed results with those.
How many hogs in the county do you know?
I do not. You know, Tom?
Are they dairy producing, or are they biogas with dairy, or are they with swine?
With dairy,
Dairy.
ones that we're familiar with.
Yeah, we haven't heard of any swine, but maybe two.
They say the swine operations, swine are a lot more efficient than dairy, so there's a lot less product, that's left, that's useful. The dairy animals, of course, they produce more manure, and they just don't digest it as well, so it's a lot better for that type of setup.
Other questions? Any other topic for guests from Bloomfield? It's almost, what else do you want to mention?
This is a little off topic, but one of the tiger.
Yeah, well, and maybe
We can have.
we applied for a tiger grant in our community. You guys received a tiger grant in Decorah or Winship County a few years ago?
DOT tiger grant.
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
Okay, we want to learn about that from someone at some point, but we weren't successful. We just touched a little bit on the role of how the municipal utility structure helps us, but certainly for our community, we talk about local ownership and all of that. Our municipal utility has done a lot for our community. It gives us resources that we wouldn't have just through traditional taxing. So I don't know, it's just, if you have questions about how that works and how it functions, we'd be happy to entertain those. Other questions as well. Yeah.
How long have you been a municipal?
Well, at least 60 years, probably longer. I don't know for sure, but one of the council members was talking about, he's over 80 and he was talking about in his 20s helping bring in the second set of generation, so.
So you own all of the distribution system, the infrastructure,
We do.
which would be a real barrier, as we've talked about this, sort of buying out Alliance infrastructure would be very expensive for Decorah to try to start from scratch.
Yeah, anything you do in power is gonna be expensive, There are benefits too, right? I mean, once you own that infrastructure, then you have, other opportunities come with it, so. I don't know, all along the way, we get talked to about, oh, that's really expensive, that's really hard. Yeah, so you gotta do something, so you might as well spend some time on what sounds interesting. Yes?
Do you have I know you're talking about going to smart meters within the city.
Yeah.
Is there a demand side management system at all, load management type system? Or are you thinking about that?
We're thinking about it. It's an interesting, so our contract with the cooperative prohibits us from doing peak shaving. So how that translates, we haven't really explored, and I don't know if you know Mark, the CEO down there. He's repeatedly said, well, let's not talk about the contract, let's have conversations. So, I think there's room for us to, they know our goals, they know what we're trying to achieve. And as long as we can work together and not upset their business model too much, too fast, then I think they're open to concepts, but it's not something we're pushing hard right now. Yes?
I'd like to hear a little bit more about what capacity building measures have been necessary in order to go down this path that you're going down with your community.
Yeah, so our Vistas are working on 3 avenues. One is volunteer, building up our volunteer base. So we're trying to figure out how do we better recruit and manage volunteers as a community, and how do you get some recognition for that as a group. So we have one Vista member, that's her entire job is helping to build that volunteer base. Sometimes it's relating to energy and sometimes it isn't. Warren is working on green job skills development, and really what that you can talk a little bit about it, Warren, but it's putting out ideas. What are some ways that we could try something new and different and maybe create a job opportunity. Maybe it's creating a new job opportunity, a new business opportunity, or maybe it's adding on to an existing business. So he's got some thoughts and ideas there. And then the third person is really focused on it's residential energy efficiency coordination, but we're focusing that on education and marketing. So putting together materials, there's a lot of materials out there about energy efficiency, but they're not local. So how do we take these ideas and concepts and market them to our community? So maybe it's changing the language so that you go from net metering or net zero to energy independence or whatever. So actually we're recruiting right now for that third business, so if you know anybody that might be open to
It's warmer down there.
Yeah. it is. Warren, do you want to say anything
Almost
about
everybody says.
I don't know, Chris and I had a discussion and, sorry, I committed to write 100, what I do is it's basically like a mini proposal. It's throw a few numbers out, here's an idea, if somebody's interested, but I'd be happy to help them research it further, crunch some numbers and whatnot. My background's in economics and electrical engineering, so actually, when I got this job, I sort of had in mind that I was going to be helping to design solar fields and wind and stuff like that. But this is fun, and I think it's a benefit to the community. We get somebody adding a position to their company or a contract. I'm really interested in this passive house design. In fact, I have in mind to contact a contractor who happens to be on the city council about trying to, get to where he can perform that kind of service. See if we can push for a little bit tighter homes, location.
So our contractor base is middle-aged and up. We used to have like many community schools. We had a house building.
House trades.
House trades course. And when the teacher retired, we discontinued that whole session and whole course. And we've seen a reduction in available contractors since we've done that. So they're middle-aged, they're experienced, they have a set way of doing things. So we're trying to figure out how we can inject some new ideas and new models, revenue models into their businesses, but also, like Warren mentioned, just tossing out 100 ideas to as many people as you can and seeing what bites. How can we just keep putting it out there and putting it out there and putting it out there, hoping that it'll spark
Business
something in them.
development ideas.
Yeah.
Right, well,
Right.
when we went to the eLab Accelerator, and we sat down and said, okay, what's part of the roadmap here? How are we gonna sell this to the community? We discovered that it was, we want something that creates jobs or is an economic development engine as well as energy efficiency, part of the equation.
And I think one feeds the other in this case. We do something in energy or efficiency, and then that spurs some economic growth, which spurs us to do more.
Well, it's 8:30, Larry.
Well, let me just add one thing. When you talk to people in cities, large cities, it's hard to get things to come together. When we're in smaller communities and we get a group together and we start talking about what we can change, it's actually easier to do. And so you're to be congratulated for your progressive community and how you pulled it together.
Thank you.
You've got a great future.
Well, we hope we're heading down a path that'll be interesting and fruitful.
We're not afraid to make mistakes.
Right, yeah, we made it through along the way. But, yeah, it's been a lot of fun too, to be honest.
Super. Well, feel free to hang out. We'll be around for a while. Don't forget to put your $10 in for breakfast back there. Energy breakfast, the third Tuesday as usual, and thank you very much.
Good camera work.